The weight of impending bankruptcy pressed against my chest like a lead vest as I stared at the mounting stack of unpaid invoices on my desk. 20 years of building Morgan Construction from the ground up, and here I was, watching it crumble beneath the ruthless hammer of economic downturn. The morning sun streaming through my office window felt like a spotlight, exposing every failure, every miscalculation that had brought me to this point. Emma's words from our argument this morning still rang in my ears. "Michael, we need to consider selling before it's too late." My wife of 15 years, always the voice of reason, always trying to protect us from the storms I seemed hellbent on weathering. But selling felt like surrendering, like betraying every promise I'd made to my employees, to myself. The knock on my office door startled me from my thoughts. Randy, my younger brother, stood there with that familiar grin that had always preceded either brilliant ideas or spectacular disasters throughout our childhood. Today, he wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, a far cry from the hand-me-downs we'd shared growing up. "Big brother," he said, stepping into my office without waiting for an invitation, "I think I have the solution to all your problems." He dropped into the chair across from my desk, emanating confidence like expensive cologne. I leaned back, trying to mask my desperation with professional detachment. "Randy, if this is another one of your get-rich-quick schemes." "No schemes, Michael. Pure, legitimate business opportunity." He pulled out a leather portfolio, sliding it across my desk. "I've been watching you struggle, and it kills me. My investment firm is looking to diversify into construction. We need an established company with a solid reputation, like Morgan Construction. We inject capital, you maintain operational control, everybody wins." The numbers in the proposal made my head spin. The investment would more than cover my debts, with enough left over to bid on larger projects. It seemed too good to be true, which is exactly what Emma would say. That evening, when I showed Emma the proposal, her reaction was exactly what I'd expected. We stood in our kitchen, the proposal spread across the island counter between us like a battle line. "Randy?" Her voice carried that edge of controlled fury I'd learned to recognize. "The same Randy who convinced you to invest in that revolutionary cryptocurrency 5 years ago? The one that disappeared with half our savings?" "He's changed, Emma. He's successful now, legitimate. You should see his office downtown. Appearances can be bought, Michael. Trust has to be earned." She pushed the proposal away like it was contaminated. "Have you forgotten about the money he borrowed from your mother for his foolproof real estate venture? The one that left her remortgaging her house?" I paced the kitchen, running my fingers through my graying hair. "That was years ago. People change. And right now, we're running out of options." "There are always options," Emma insisted, her green eyes intense with concern. "We can downsize, restructure. Morgan Construction survived the 2008 recession. We can weather this storm too." But the proposal sat on my desk like a siren's song all week. Each new overdue notice, each conversation with worried suppliers, pushed me closer to accepting Randy's offer. I caught myself staring at his business card, remembering the countless times he'd pulled me into his schemes when we were kids. But we weren't kids anymore, and this wasn't a scheme to sneak into the movies or sweet-talk our way out of trouble. The final push came when I had to delay payroll for the first time in 20 years. The shame in Jenny from accounting's eyes when I told her to hold the checks until Monday was worse than any financial statement. I signed the contract on a Friday afternoon. Randy's firm's lawyers had drawn up the paperwork, thick with legal jargon that made my eyes glaze over. My lawyer advised caution, suggesting we take more time to review the terms, but desperation has a way of making warning signs look like green lights. Emma's silence when I told her was worse than any argument. She simply walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the weight of my decision and the nagging feeling that I just made either the best or worst choice of my life. As I sat in my darkening home office that night, staring at the family photo on my desk, Emma and me at our daughter Sarah's college graduation last year, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just opened a door that couldn't be closed. Little did I know, that door would lead to a nightmare that would test every bond of family, love, and trust one held dear. The real question wasn't whether Randy had changed, it was whether our family would survive what was coming. The first signs of trouble appeared like hairline cracks in a foundation, subtle, easily dismissed, yet harboring catastrophic potential. It started with small irregularities in our accounts that our bookkeeper, Jenny, brought to my attention. Vendor payments being processed twice, invoices with missing documentation, wire transfers to companies I'd never heard of. Each discrepancy was explained away by Randy's team with practiced ease, wrapped in layers of corporate jargon and reassuring smiles. I sat in my office late one night, reviewing the latest financial reports when my phone buzzed. A text from Emma, coming home soon. The digital clock on my desk showed 11:47 p.m. I'd missed dinner again, lost in the maze of numbers that increasingly refused to add up. The distance between us stretched wider with each passing day, measured in unspoken words and worried glances. Just finishing up, I typed back, knowing she'd see through the lie. The truth was, I couldn't face going home, couldn't bear to see the concern in her eyes that was rapidly transforming into something darker, resignation, perhaps, or worse, vindication. The knock on my door made me jump. Jenny stood there, clutching a stack of papers to her chest like armor. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows under her eyes, highlighting the strain of secrets kept too long. "Mr. Morgan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something you need to see." She laid the papers on my desk with trembling hands. "I've been tracking these transactions for weeks. The patterns, they're consistent with money laundering." The words hit me like a physical blow, each syllable a hammer strike against my chest. My vision tunneled as I flipped through the pages, transaction logs, bank statements, cross-referenced data that painted a picture so clear it burned. "Have you shown these to anyone else?" I asked, my voice sounding distant and unfamiliar to my own ears. Jenny shook her head. "Just you." "But Mr. Morgan, your brother's team has been asking for access to our entire accounting system. They're pushing hard, saying it's required under the new partnership agreement." I dismissed Jenny with assurances of discretion, but we both knew the weight of what had been revealed would crush any pretense of normal business operations. As I drove home through the empty streets, every streetlight seemed to illuminate another memory of Randy's past schemes, now cast in the harsh light of present reality. Emma was waiting up, curled in her favorite armchair with a book she wasn't reading. The moment I stepped through the door, she knew. 15 years of marriage had given her an uncanny ability to read the devastation in my stance, the defeat in my eyes. "How bad?" she asked simply. I collapsed onto the couch, the leather creaking beneath the weight of my shame. "He's using the company to launder money, Emma. The investment, the partnership, it was all a front. And I handed him the keys to everything I've built." Her silence filled the room like smoke, choking off any attempt at justification or explanation. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of years of ignored warnings. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted, the words tasting like ash. "If I go to the authorities, the company goes down. Everyone loses their jobs. If I confront Randy, God knows what he's involved with, what kind of people he's working for." The next morning, I arrived at the office early, determined to gather more evidence before Randy's team could cover their tracks. But he was already there, waiting in my office with that same confident smile that now seemed more predatory than reassuring. "Morning, big brother," he said, gesturing to the chair behind my own desk. "We need to talk about some operational changes." I remained standing, my hand still on the doorknob. "How long have you been planning this, Randy? Was any of it real, or was I just another mark in your con?" His smile didn't waver, but something cold and calculating crept into his eyes. "Sit down, Michael. Let's discuss this like businessmen. After all, we're family." Family? The word felt like poison on my tongue. You've turned my company into a criminal enterprise. You've put everything I've built at risk, my reputation, my employees' livelihoods, my freedom. And that's exactly why you're going to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say, Randy replied, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Because right now, your signature is on every document, every transaction. Your company, your responsibility. So let's talk about how we move forward, together. I sank into my chair, the full weight of my brother's betrayal pressing against my chest like a knife. Outside my office, I could hear the normal morning sounds of my employees arriving, innocent people whose lives I'd inadvertently put at risk through my own desperate trust in blood ties. The truth I'd been avoiding for weeks finally crystallized. This wasn't just about saving my company anymore. It was about survival. Guilt has a peculiar weight to it, settling not just on your shoulders but seeping into your bones, turning every movement into an exercise in carrying shame. I felt it with every step through the offices of Morgan Construction, watching my employees go about their daily routines, blissfully unaware that their livelihoods balanced on the knife edge of my catastrophic mistake. The drive to my mother's house that evening felt like a descent into my own personal purgatory. The familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood now seemed to mock me with their peaceful domesticity, each manicured lawn and warm porch light a reminder of the respectability I'd put at risk. Emma's words from our latest argument echoed in my mind, "You're not just risking yourself anymore, Michael. You're risking everything your father built, everything he trusted you to protect." My mother's house stood exactly as it had during my childhood, the white colonial with blue shutters that had weathered 4 decades of family dramas, celebrations, and reconciliations. Now it would bear witness to another chapter in our family's increasingly tragic story. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for me. Martha Morgan, 72 years old but straight-backed as ever, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. Her eyes, the same deep brown as Randy's, searched my face with the penetrating insight that had always seen through our childhood deceptions. "You look terrible," she said simply, leading me into the kitchen where a pot of coffee already waited. The room smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, the sense of countless family discussions, both joyous and painful. "Tell me what my youngest has done this time." I sank into my usual chair at the kitchen table, feeling like a teenager again, confessing to some minor transgression. Except this time, the stakes were astronomical, and I wasn't just an accomplice to Randy's schemes, I was his willing victim. "I should have listened to Emma," I began, the words scraping my throat like broken glass. "Should have remembered every time he's burned us before." But I wanted to believe he'd changed, that success had finally made him legitimate. My mother's hands wrapped around her coffee mug, her wedding ring catching the light, the only piece of jewelry she'd kept after selling everything else to cover Randy's failed real estate venture. "Your father always said your greatest strength was your ability to see the best in people. He also said it would be your downfall if you weren't careful." "Dad would be ashamed of me now," I whispered, the truth of it hitting me with fresh force. "I've put everything at risk, the company, our reputation, our future." "Thomas would be concerned, not ashamed," she corrected firmly. "There's a difference. Shame is for those who act with malice. You acted with hope, misplaced as it may have been." She paused, studying me with those penetrating eyes. "The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" I spread my hands on the familiar wooden table, tracing the grain patterns I'd memorized over decades of family meals. "Randy's got me cornered. Every transaction, every document has my signature. He's made sure I'm legally responsible for everything. And you think that makes you powerless?" The edge in her voice made me look up. "Your brother has always been clever, but he's never understood the difference between intelligence and wisdom. He thinks because he can manipulate papers and numbers, he controls the situation. But documents aren't the only form of power, Michael." She rose and went to the kitchen drawer, pulling out a thick envelope. "After the real estate disaster, I started keeping records. Emails, bank statements, recorded conversations, everything that showed the pattern of his schemes. I knew someday he'd go too far, try to con the wrong person. She placed the envelope in front of me. Or the right person, as it turns out. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, scanning the contents. Years of documented deceptions, carefully preserved by a mother who'd had to learn to protect herself from her own son. The weight of what this meant, both practically and emotionally, settled over me like a heavy cloak. "Mom." I started, but she cut me off with a raised hand. "I've spent years protecting Randy from consequences, hoping each time would be the last, that he'd finally learn. Instead, I've only enabled him to cause more damage, hurt more people. Sometimes love means letting someone face the results of their actions." The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed, marking the moments of this seismic shift in our family's dynamics. Outside, a car door slammed, and my mother's expression changed subtly. "That would be Emma," she said, standing. "I called her after you texted that you were coming over. You've isolated yourself enough with this burden, Michael. It's time to let your wife help you fight this battle." As Emma's footsteps approached the back door, I realized my mother had orchestrated this entire evening, creating a space for truth and alliance building when I'd been too lost in my shame to reach out myself. The door opened, and Emma entered, her face a complex mixture of concern and determination. The time for self-recrimination was over. Now we needed a plan. The weight of Randy's ultimatum pressed against my consciousness like a blade against skin, drawing blood with every breath. Standing in my office, watching the autumn rain trace patterns down the windows, I felt the last vestiges of my old self, trusting, optimistic, naive, dissolve into the growing darkness of my new reality. "Take the fall, or lose everything." His words hung in the air between us, toxic and corrosive. The leather of my chair creaked as I leaned back, studying the stranger wearing my brother's face. The morning light caught the silver at his temples, a detail that suddenly seemed profound. We were both aging, but while time had painted my hair with wisdom's frost, it had merely refined Randy's capacity for cruelty. "You want me to confess to orchestrating the entire scheme," I repeated, tasting the bitterness of each word. "To claim I manipulated you, used your investment firm as an unwitting tool for money laundering." Randy's smile was a masterpiece of calculated sympathy. "It's the cleanest solution, Michael. You take a plea deal, serve minimal time, and the company survives under new management. Your employees keep their jobs. Emma and Sarah maintain their lifestyle. Everyone wins. Except me. Better one casualty than a massacre, wouldn't you say?" He adjusted his Italian silk tie, a gesture so casual it made my blood boil. "Besides, you're partly responsible. You signed the documents. You overlooked the red flags. In a way, you're just accepting the consequences of your own willful blindness." The rage that surged through me was primal, a tsunami of fury that threatened to sweep away decades of brotherly restraint. My hands gripped the arms of my chair until my knuckles turned white, anchoring me against the overwhelming urge to vault across the desk and wrap them around his throat instead. "Get out," I whispered, each syllable trembling with barely contained violence. "Think about it, big brother. You have until Friday." He rose smoothly, adjusting his jacket with manicured hands that had never known honest labor. "For the family's sake, make the right choice." The door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in my skull. For long minutes, I sat motionless, letting the magnitude of my situation settle into my bones. The family photos on my desk seemed to mock me now, snapshots of birthdays, holidays, celebrations where Randy and I stood arm in arm, smiling at the camera with manufactured brotherhood. My phone buzzed, a text from Emma, "Remember who you are." 3 simple words that cracked the dam of my composure. A sound escaped me, half laugh, half sob. Who was I? The trusting fool who'd handed his legacy to a viper. The desperate businessman who'd ignored every warning sign. The loving brother who'd chosen loyalty over logic. The answer came in fragments, like shards of a broken mirror slowly reassembling themselves. I was my father's son, heir to his integrity as much as his company. I was Emma's husband, partner in a marriage built on mutual respect and unwavering support. I was Sarah's father, responsible for showing her that principles matter more than profits. The revelation settled over me like armor, heavy but empowering. Randy had miscalculated. By threatening everything I held dear, he'd inadvertently stripped away my last reason for maintaining the facade of fraternal loyalty. The man who'd walked into this office this morning might have been willing to sacrifice himself to protect the family name, but that man had died under the weight of Randy's ultimatum. I reached for my phone, fingers hovering over the keypad. The list of names scrolled past: Emma, Mom, our family lawyer, Sarah. Each one represented a thread in the tapestry of loyalty and love that Randy had tried to weaponize against me. But he'd forgotten something crucial: true loyalty goes both ways. It demands reciprocation, nurturing, respect. What he offered was merely manipulation dressed in familial obligation. The door opened again, and Jenny appeared, her face pale but determined. "Mr. Morgan. Those documents you asked for. I found them." She clutched a manila envelope to her chest like a shield. "But sir, if what I've uncovered is correct, this goes way beyond money laundering. There are connections to offshore accounts, shell companies. I think your brother might be involved with some very dangerous people." The words should have terrified me. Instead, they crystallized my resolve. Randy had always been the smarter brother, the clever one who could talk his way out of any situation. But he'd finally overplayed his hand. In his arrogance, he'd forgotten that desperation breeds determination, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one who has nothing left to lose. I took the envelope from Jenny's trembling hands, feeling the weight of its contents, documents that could either save or destroy everything I'd built. "Thank you, Jenny. Go home. Take the rest of the week off. In fact, don't come back until you hear from me directly." She hesitated in the doorway. "Sir. What are you going to do?" I looked up from the envelope, meeting her concerned gaze with newfound steel in mine. "I'm going to remind my brother that some games are too dangerous to play with family. Revenge, I discovered, tastes like copper and winter frost, metallic and bitter, yet clarifying in its crystalline purity." As I sat in our dim kitchen at 3 a.m, spreading the evidence of Randy's machinations across the granite countertop like tarot cards predicting his downfall, I felt an almost transcendent sense of purpose crystallizing within me. Emma moved silently behind me, her presence a steadying force in the darkness. The soft clink of her coffee mug against the counter punctuated my thoughts like periods at the end of decisive sentences. We had spent the past week meticulously constructing Randy's undoing, each piece of evidence a brick in the wall of his inevitable destruction. "The offshore accounts are the key," she murmured, tracing a finger along a complex web of transactions we'd mapped out. "Randy's always been arrogant about his intelligence, but he's left breadcrumbs. Traditional money launderers move funds through dozens of shells, but he's used the same 15 companies repeatedly. He thought he was being clever, but he's created a pattern." The wisdom in her words struck me with the force of revelation. Randy's greatest weakness had always been his certainty in his own brilliance. Each previous scheme, each manipulation, had reinforced his belief in his infallibility. Now, that same hubris would become the instrument of his downfall. "We need to move carefully," I said, my voice sounding foreign in the pre-dawn quiet. "These connections to Eastern European accounts, they suggest involvement with people who don't handle exposure well." The implications hung heavy in the air between us, unspoken but acknowledged. This wasn't just about saving my company anymore, it was about surviving the aftermath of what we were about to unleash. Jenny's files had revealed a labyrinth of financial manipulation far more extensive than simple money laundering. Randy hadn't just used Morgan Construction as a washing machine for dirty money, he'd turned it into a hub for an international network of financial fraud. The realization that my family's legacy had been twisted into a tool for organized crime sent waves of nausea through me, but also hardened my resolve. Michael. Emma's hand covered mine, warm and steady. Are you certain about involving Sarah? Once she accesses those banking records from her position at the firm. She's already involved, I interrupted, the truth of it burning in my throat. The moment Randy threatened our family, he made her part of this. At least this way, she's acting to protect herself, not just being collateral damage in his schemes. The plan we'd crafted was elegant in its simplicity, turning Randy's own methods against him. Sarah, working in risk management at a major banking firm, would flag the suspicious patterns we'd identified. Meanwhile, Mom's years of documented evidence would establish the historical pattern of Randy's manipulations, undermining any attempt he might make to paint me as the mastermind. But it was Jenny's discovery that provided the final piece, a hidden email server containing years of correspondence between Randy and his real partners. Messages that revealed not just the scope of their operations, but the contempt with which he viewed his marks, including me. Reading his casual discussions of how easily he'd manipulated his trusting fool of a brother had transformed something in me, cauterizing the last vestiges of familial loyalty. Tomorrow, I said, gathering the documents into precise piles, I'll meet with him as planned. Let him think he's won, that I'm ready to take the fall. The words tasted like ash, but the fire building behind them promised purification through destruction. While he's gloating over my apparent surrender, the wheels will already be in motion. Emma stood, moving to the window where the first hints of dawn painted the sky in shades of judgment. He'll never forgive you for this. The laugh that escaped me held no mirth, only the sharp edges of broken illusions. Forgiveness requires conscience, Emma. Randy abandoned his long ago in pursuit of profit. No, this isn't about forgiveness, it's about justice, and perhaps a different kind of family legacy. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, access granted. Files copied. You were right about the transfer patterns. Each word was another nail in Randy's coffin, another step toward reclaiming what he tried to steal, not just my company, but my very identity. As the sun began its slow ascent, casting long shadows across our kitchen floor, I felt an almost preternatural calm settle over me. The evidence was gathered, the players positioned, the trap set. Tomorrow, Randy would learn that while he'd been perfecting the art of financial manipulation, I'd been mastering something far more powerful, the ability to turn truth into a weapon. Let's get some rest, Emma suggested, but we both knew sleep would elude us. The hours ahead thrummed with too much potential energy, too many carefully orchestrated pieces waiting to fall into their destined places. Instead, we sat together in the growing light, two conspirators bound by love and righteousness, watching the dawn of Randy's last day of freedom paint the sky in shades of vindication. The moment of reckoning arrived with the weight of inevitability, heavy as thunder before a storm. I watched Randy stride into my office, his confidence a bespoke armor of Italian wool and practiced charm. The morning light caught his signet ring as he settled into the chair across from me, our father's ring, claimed from Mom's jewelry box years ago with smooth words about preserving family legacy. I knew you'd make the right decision, Michael, he said, satisfaction dripping from each syllable. Blood always tells in the end, doesn't it? The irony of his words tasted like copper on my tongue. He had no idea how prophetic they would prove, though not in the way he intended. I met his gaze steadily, allowing him to see what he expected: defeat, resignation, the capitulation of an older brother finally accepting his place in the younger's shadow. I've prepared a statement, I said, sliding a document across the desk. Full confession, taking responsibility for everything. The paper was real, every word carefully crafted to appear genuine while revealing nothing of consequence. A prop in this final act of our lifelong drama. Randy's smile widened as he reached for it, and in that moment, I saw him clearly, not as my brother, not as the charming rogue of our childhood adventures, but as the predator he'd become. Each line of his face was etched with the quiet satisfaction of a carnivore surveying wounded prey. You know, Michael, this really is the best outcome for everyone. A few years in a minimum security facility, and then a fresh start. The company survives, the family reputation remains intact. He paused, examining the confession with the careful eye of a connoisseur. You're doing the noble thing. Nobility, I echoed, tasting the bitterness of the word. Tell me, Randy, when did you first plan this? Was it before or after you saw the company's financial troubles in the public records? The subtle shift in his expression, a momentary tightening around the eyes, confirmed what I'd suspected. He'd been watching, waiting for the perfect moment of vulnerability. Like a virus seeking a compromised immune system, he'd identified my desperation as his opportunity. The timing isn't important, he deflected smoothly. What matters is the solution. Speaking of which. He reached into his briefcase, withdrawing another document. The plea agreement, already reviewed by my lawyers. Sign this, and everything falls into place. The door opened behind him, right on schedule. Emma entered first, followed by two serious-looking men in dark suits. The shift in the room's atmosphere was immediate, electric with potential energy. Randy Morgan. One of the men stepped forward, badge glinting. We need you to come with us. We have some questions about certain financial transactions. The transformation on my brother's face was remarkable, shock bleeding into confusion, then understanding, and finally a rage so pure it stripped away decades of practiced sophistication. What did you do? He snarled, half rising from his chair. Blood always tells, I replied softly, watching as the federal agents moved to flank him. But so do bank records, email servers, and years of documented fraud. Did you really think I'd just roll over, Randy? That I'd sacrifice everything, my integrity, my future, my family's trust, to protect your schemes? Your own brother, he spat, as the agents began reading his rights. You betrayed your own blood. No, Randy. You did that. Every time you saw family as something to exploit rather than protect. Every time you confused loyalty with submission. Every time you mistook trust for weakness. I stood, feeling the weight of decades of manipulation falling away. The betrayal was yours. This is justice. They let him out, his protests echoing down the hallway like the last gasps of a dying era. Emma moved to my side, her hand finding mine in a grip that anchored me to the present, to the reality of what we'd just done. Jenny's delivering the complete files to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit now, she said quietly. Sarah's bank has already frozen the suspicious accounts. It's over, Michael. But it wasn't over. Not really. As I stood in my office, watching the federal agents escort my brother to their waiting vehicle, I felt the first tremors of transformation rumbling through my consciousness. The man I'd been, the eternal older brother, the keeper of family peace, the willing victim of manipulated loyalty, was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the cold necessity of justice. Later that evening, sitting in our mother's kitchen where this all began, I finally allowed myself to feel the full magnitude of the day's events. Mom reached across the table, her weathered hand covering mine with the wisdom of years. You did what I never could, she said simply. You broke the cycle. The tears that came then were not of grief but of release, washing away the last vestiges of guilt, of misplaced loyalty, of brotherhood corrupted by greed. Through the window, I watched the sun setting on the neighborhood where Randy and I had grown up, its golden light painting everything in shades of transformation. Emma's arms encircled me from behind, her presence a testament to the kind of loyalty that sustains rather than destroys. Ready to go home? Home. Not just the physical space we shared, but the emotional territory we'd reclaimed from the shadow of Randy's manipulation. The company would survive, stronger for having excised its cancer. Our family would heal, bonded by truth rather than obligation. And I would move forward, carrying the lessons of this ordeal like battle scars, proud markers of survival, of growth, of the price paid for reclaiming one's soul from the marketplace of corrupted love. Yes, I answered, rising to embrace the future we'd fought so hard to secure. Let's go home.